Before the Bible was sealed, there was war. Not on earth, but in the highest realms where light once sang in harmony before it shattered. Most will never hear this, but you're not like most. You feel it, don't you? The pulse beneath the scriptures, the name they worship but never truly knew. Michael, Archangel, warrior of divine law. His story was hidden, scattered like burning fragments across forbidden scrolls and trembling bloodlines. What if the battle wasn't won? What if the trumpet still echoes? Keep listening, because the truth is waking and it remembers your name. In the beginning there was no battle, no flame, no fall. There was only the song resonating through the fabric of unformed realms, a breathless harmony unmarred by will or war. Before thrones, before dominions, before even the first syllables of Michael were uttered in the mouths of stars, there was unity. Not silence, but a sound so whole it circled in on itself, pure purpose vibrating in timeless alignment. The ancients called it the symphonia, the divine consonants, long before Plato carried whispers of it into his music of the spheres. But then something shifted. Not a scream, not a shout. A pause. A discordant intention flickered at the edge of source, like a thought born where no thought should be. It did not speak, but it unsettled the current. And what had been seamless, perfect, indivisible, cracked. In Coptic fragments of the Apocalypse of Abraham, there is a veiled echo, God addressing an angel who has turned his face, and in that turning a cascade began. Whether heavenly or fallen, the name of that angel is never spoken. But that omission, that is the scar. This was not the war we remember. It was the prelude the canon forgot. For in the breath before rebellion, hierarchy had not yet crystallized. There were no generals, no flaming swords. Only presences, beings of light shaped by function, not fame. Intelligences moving like chords in a vast living scale. And in that formless radiance moved one steady silent, defined by his refusal to turn. Michael, not yet named, not yet needed. But even then, when the celestial pitch faltered, something in him burned with alignment. Not pride, not vengeance, but resolve. A loyalty not to the throne, but to the harmony itself, to rightness, to the unbroken chord, the root note enduring through chaos. Legends whisper that it was Michael who first stabilized the vibration, the first response to the breach. Not with might, but resonance. Righteous resistance, not as conflict, but correction. In the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, he appears not as a war leader, but as an intercessor, a protector, a preserver of the original song. And some say his voice, unheard to mortal ears, still vibrates under the ruins of temples lost to flood and fire. That in the silence beneath certain enunciations there's a tremor that remembers. But what was the first dissonance? Who authored the first fracture? And why did no one speak the name? And still, they watch from below. It began in light, but not the way you think. Before the first name, before the archangels were throned or the heavens partitioned, there was tone. A song, creation's resonance. Not a voice or word, but pure harmonic presence. The seraphim shimmered like chords made flesh. The realms did not speak, they vibrated in unity. And then it stopped. A silence, ancient, reverent, terrifying. Not the silence of peace, but of fracture. The kind of quiet that falls when something larger than sound has just broken. In the apocryphal second book of Enoch, still whispered across deserts and chambered deep in Slavic manuscripts, the angel stood without command, as if creation forgot itself. Light that had once flowed like an unbroken breath stuttered, and in that stumble came awareness. Consciousness crept in, and where there is consciousness there is choice. Where there is choice, division. This is the moment we are never taught. The first silence after light. A silence not empty but echoing with risk. Michael, he was not yet Michael, not a name, not a warrior, no flaming sword drawn in defiance. Only presence, raw, tense, unshaped. The soul of vigilance unawakened, but shadow was forming. Somewhere behind eternity's veil, intent turned inward. Selfhood began to crystallize, and with it dissonance. The Zohar speaks cautiously. The great rift was not war not at first, it was forgetting. 1,000 angelic faces turned from their origin just slightly, but the symmetry was broken. From that, fault-line silence became strategy. That's why so many root texts are missing, not lost seared. The Nag Hammadi codices buried deep in Egyptian sand hint at this, not with light but with absence, gaps, erasures, gospels denied breath. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls fall quiet when you lean in too close, as if there are names even their parchment was worn not to hold. Here is where Michael's story truly begins, not in trumpet blasts or victories, but in the hushed aftermath of a fall no one dared record. He emerged not to fight evil, but to recognize it, and in doing so became its mirror. So consider this: before the battle, before the blade, before the banner that read Quis ut Deus, who is like God. There was only one question: who first heard the silence and chose not to look away. And still they watch from below. It was never erased, it was fractured. Like glass struck beneath the weight of eternity. In the echo chambers of sacred time, where silence was once the only law, a cosmic fracture birthed dissonance. The first note not in harmony, the first no whispering through creation. Before heaven bore names, before Michael was Michael, an unnamed resonance split the still waters of the divine. Not rebellion, not yet, but resonance, discordant, pulsating, forbidden. The breach was not loud. It came like a breath in reverse. Like a tremor behind the veil of becoming. A quiet undoing in the architecture of light. They speak of him now as the sword-bearer, the chief warrior of light. But where is the parchment that tells of the silence he tore through, or the veil that silenced his cry? In the smoke-stained corners of Qumran, fragments of the war scroll hint that Michael stood above the sons of light in not just war, but remembrance. Scholars call him Michael, who is like God. But what they rarely ask is, who asked first? His name was born not in triumph, but in interruption. Even in the Babylonian Talmud, where his voice filters through as advocate and prince, a deeper shadow lingers. He is named, but only so far as memory allows. And memory here is a cracked vessel, half bearing water, half bleeding truth. The Dead Sea Scrolls whisper of him, not as a simple messenger, but as Sar Ha-Panim, the prince of the presence. Yet even that exaltation is a mask recovered from shattered timelines. Ancient Targums place him among the highest of the heavenly hosts, even as later Christian and Islamic traditions clothe him in armor and judgment. But go back further, back to when divine hierarchy still shifted with breath and fire, and you'll find no throne clearly marked for him. Only a rift, a wound, a silence broken. The origin was not rebellion. The origin was divergence, a thread deviant in the loom of unity. A resonance that refused to return. In the book of Daniel, the name surfaces, a protector of nations, a revealer of prophecy. But by then the war between memory and manuscript had already begun. What was left out, what was redacted, what was buried beneath the rulings of councils and the rise of empires is the truer chronicle, the scroll of suppressed memory, burned edges, torn lines. A name once too dangerous to leave whole. So who veiled Michael before he veiled others? Who chose which verses survived the flame? And whose memory are we really reading when we speak of an angel who remembers what heaven tried to forget? And still, they watch from below. It was not written in flame or thunder. It was signed in silence, the kind that follows betrayal. Not a script of peace, but a contract of containment. The covenant etched in ash was never meant to be read by mortal eyes, because it wasn't meant to survive the fire. Before the ink dried on Genesis, before the breath of God hovered over the deep, there was an agreement, a binding scorched into the unseen folds of creation. This was not the bright trumpet-blazing Michael of Catholic lore, nor the legalistic enforcer of rabbinic tradition. This was the oath-bearer, the guardian who did not volunteer, but remained when even angels recoiled. You see, Michael doesn't appear in the book of Genesis. His name first erupts from the margins in Daniel 10:13, not as a messenger but as a chief prince who contends with dark dominions. By the time scribes dared to speak him, he was already bound to the covenant. A covenant older than Babylon, older than exile. Whispers of it bleed through later apocalyptic texts. One Enoch revelation, the Dead Sea Scrolls, but none unveil its origin, because its origin was erased. Scrubbed like chalk from temple stone, its smoke woven into hymns no longer sung. Some claim the vestiges remained layered in the Hekalat visions, heavenly palaces where Michael stood not with sword in hand but incense. There between veils of sapphire and lightning he bore no crown, only burden. Priest of a promise none remembered making, yet all feared breaking. In some early Christian and Jewish mystical traditions, Michael was not merely an angel of war. He was the priest of heaven, the one who stood over the altar when Lucifer stood over the mirror. It is in these unseen rituals, echoed faintly in extra-biblical works like the Assumption of Moses, that his role as covenant keeper flickers. He binds, he burns, he remembers, and the covenant. It was not just between heaven and Michael, it was between heaven and what heaven feared. A pact to hold back chaos, sealed not with law but with loyalty, etched not on scrolls, but into ash, into the ruins of forgotten glory, into the bones of stars that collapsed from memory, into the blackened gaps between psalms. And if the covenant was never meant to be broken, why does the world tremble like a promise is unraveling? And still, they watch from below. It began not with thunder but with harmony, a soundless song. The unspoken resonance that held all realms in suspension before breath, before boundaries, before the stars were chiseled into their heavenly vaults. No name had yet been carved in fire, no throne claimed as sovereign. Creation hung like incense in a temple unbuilt, sacred, sublime, undecided. But something moved, not forward, not back, but inward, and that was enough to tear the silence. A single dissonance like a pulse through still water, and with it came the trembling. Not of stone or sky, but of thrones, those unseen architectures of divine order. Foundations that were never meant to shake now quivered beneath an unspoken challenge. In that unrecorded moment, a question rose among the host too radiant to doubt. Who is like God? The name Michael had not yet been given, but the question would one day become his cry. And within that cry, a fracture, a shimmer in the firmament caught not by the eye but by the soul. The book of Revelation calls him the one who cast down the dragon, that old serpent of pride, the shadow crowned in light. Revelation 12:7-9 unveils Michael stepping forth as warrior, chaos splitter, stalwart of the Most High. But what led to that clash? What predated the war of stars? Scripture is silent, and silence is where lies go to hide. Jewish mystical texts like the Sefer Hekalat whisper of 7 archangels who stand atop the cosmos as pillars. But Michael is always noted first, closest to the flame. Islamic tradition hails him as Michael, the angel of mercy, and discourse hovering over rain clouds with a memory of thunder. Early Christian mystics saw in him the guardian of thresholds, the boundary between heaven and obligation. In all, he emerges not simply as soldier, but as order, as geometry in the heavens, the very frequency that repairs the breach. So why, before he bore a sword, did the thrones tremble when he rose? Was it the authority of allegiance or the threat of choice itself? The rebellion was never about power, it was about placement. Who stands where and why? And when the tremor passed, the silence that followed was never wholly again. Not just broken, rearranged. One angel rose not because he wished to, but because something ancient called him. But what if that call was not from above, but from the rift itself? A sacred paradox, a pull beneath the veil, a frequency older than obedience. And so we ask, was Michael born of hierarchy or of rupture? And still, they watch from below. It was not a fall, it was a flight through a forbidden sky. When the war in heaven ended, not all victors returned crowned in glory. One was cast not in defeat, but cloaked in exile. Archangel Michael, the flame-wielding sentinel, did not descend like Lucifer in defiance, nor remain like Gabriel in diplomacy. He was tasked to walk a line carved in fire beneath the wing of exile. In the book of Daniel, chapter 10, verse 13, Michael appears not as a passive observer, but as one of the chief princes, a warrior called upon when other divine beings could not break through the subterranean resistance of spiritual realms. But what the text whispers between the lines is heavier than what it declares outright. He comes not from above but through, as if navigating hidden domains neither heaven nor earth. The exile had already begun. Some say the rift began not with rebellion, but dissonance, a tremor in the celestial chord, an unspeakable note that refused to harmonize. And those attuned to the deeper tones felt it, like a fracture behind the veil, a celestial arrhythmia. In that fracture, something unspeakably sacred was hidden away, guarded not by walls but by wandering. In early Jewish mysticism, traced through the Haikalat and Merkaba literature, Michael takes on a new face, not merely warrior but Sar Ha-Panim, the Prince of the Presence. A title once associated with intimacy is twisted into a lonely stewardship of judgment. The fire that once bathed him in communion now scorched the threshold where angels fear to tread. He became the one who holds proximity while enduring distance, a sacred paradox breathing exile as purpose. Even the Quran in Surah al-Baqarah names Michael as beloved by God, yet no verses declare his comfort, no passage hints at a throne, power without rest, favor without home. And that is the deepest mark of exile, not abandonment but assignment. The Zohar in veiled phrases speaks of a guardian between veils, one whose path is flame, and whose silence protects that which cannot be named. Some interpret this as Michael, others as a composite of many, but the resonance endures. Tradition says he bears a sword, yes, but have you ever wondered why the sword never sleeps? Why its echo still hums through the bones of old temples, through the dreams of seers, through the whispers of forgotten monks in desert caves? Why would an angel undefeated still walk armed? Because exile is not a punishment. It is a mantle, a seal upon the chosen who carry unbearable truth. So the question is not, why was Michael cast out? It is, what was he protecting that was too holy to remain in heaven? And still they watch from below. Before stars bore names, before the breath of man defined them, there was song. A harmony older than Adam, sung not with voices but with presence. A divine resonance threading through the veils of the ineffable. Light and will moved as one, not separate, not divided. Choruses of being surged in a celestial equilibrium. The seraphic knew no rebellion. The thrones bent not in submission but in sacred symmetry. But then fracture, not a fall, not yet, just deviation. A single dissonant chord ringing like thunder inside eternity. Something stirred beyond the veil. Not evil, not yet, but different, alien. A vibration unaligned echoing behind the lattice of perfect light. It was not chaos, it was question. The intrusion of an unknown interval into a flawless chord. The Tzimtzum, a concept later drawn from Lurianic Kabbalah, speaks of the divine withdrawing to make space for the universe, the first contraction. But some mystics suggest a subtler pain before that act, a trembling of intent, a shiver in the breath before creation exhaled form. A divine pause, hushed and holy like the moment before a prophecy cuts the silence. The Zohar in its veiled wisdom speaks of this breaking of vessels, a shattering in the upper worlds where divine light poured too fiercely, spilling into chaos, a bursting of boundaries. It was not creation, it was a crisis of containment, and with that rupture came concealment. Before Michael could be named as one who stands, he stood unnoticed, veiled in what early Jewish mysticism calls Sod, the secret. His name didn't rise first like dawn. It waited, hidden, not absence but delay. A binding star, cloaked, watching, prepared. Not every light declared itself. Some hid in shadow, awaiting instruction. And in that shadowed interval, domains began to separate form from formlessness, will from wildness. The mask did not descend overnight. It was sewn like a question into the warp of time itself. The ancients did not write of this directly, they carved around it in stone that whispered, in silence that thundered. Certain hymns were dismantled before they were ever sung, certain names withheld. What first web was woven not in war but in warning? Was this the beginning of Michael or the beginning of the need for him? And tell me who wove it, and still they watch from below, before names, before choirs. Before the geometry of heaven solidified into order, there was song, not melody but essence. A resonance woven into the bones of reality. It vibrated through realms without border, carried on the breath of a creator whose voice spoke stars into trembling. And then something fractured, not broken, not yet, but shifted, the harmony warped. A dissonance crept in as if one note refused to resolve. A rebellion not shouted but whispered beneath light. There are no scriptures for this moment, no Genesis, no chronicle, only silence, and that silence was alive, a tremor beneath the Eternal's breath. A ripple through the lattice of the spheres, not absence but resistance. The Zohar speaks in riddles of the Rishimu, a trace left behind when divine light withdrew to make space for creation. That residue, some say, held memory. Others say it held warning. The ancient rabbis of the Midrash Rabbah whispered of a time when creation hesitated, when God consulted with the angels before forging humanity, and some objected. That protest, that seed of dissent, it was not pride, it was grief in disguise. The earliest battle was not for thrones, it was for truth. And somewhere within that divine hesitation, a presence emerged. Not called, not crowned, but compelled. Michael, not yet the archangel, not yet the defender of heaven or the slayer of serpents. A frequency within the breach, a gate, not a sword. His name, Michael, who is like God, was not a boast. It was a question asked with burning wings. A challenge aimed at the rising dissonance across the skies. Somewhere a veil was lifted. Not torn, unfolded, but the gate did not close, not fully. It held, like an eyelid that refuses sleep, like a pulse that anticipates thunder, like a breath drawn 3 ages ago still waiting to exhale. Michael stood not as an answer but as the vigilant tension between chaos and command. Not a being but a fulcrum, not dominance but devotion. Revelation 12 had not yet been written, but already the heavens knew a storm would come. Can you feel it? The breath held, the chord unresolved. The hush before thunder dares to speak. Are we not still standing at that gate? And what if Michael never left? And still they watch from below, before kings, before thrones, before the name Michael ever etched itself into the cry of nations, there was harmony, not of sound but of being. The divine realms moved as breath, as rhythm, as light rolling across unseen seas. No conflict, no sides, only the eternal song, luminous, unbound. But then something cracked. Not with a scream, but with silence. A stillness too perfect, like the pause before a storm. A resonance no longer folded into itself, but spiraled outward. Discontent whispered through angelic circuits, not disobedient yet but curious. The first question carved not in ink but in vibration: why serve? And whom? And it was in this trembling hush, in this sacred uncertainty, that a presence stirred, a guardian not yet named but already watching. The Book of Enoch, cast out from cannon by fearful hands, records a fracture, a fall of watchers who descended in the days of Jard. But what it does not name is the first sentinel who stood watching not over men but over order itself. He was not yet armored, not yet wielding the sword that would split time, and yet he was already there. There are scrolls older than Scripture buried beneath desert glass and river stone. In fragmented Aramaic words etched on copper, one phrase shivers forward: Malak Memra, the angel of the word, not a message, a presence, one who stood where thought becomes sound and sound becomes cosmos. In him the song noticed its fracture. The Kabbalah speaks of Tiferet, the Sephira of divine balance, splitting under the weight of unchecked force. Some mystics have dared to see in this the first echo of Michael, not as warrior, but as harmony's defense, the eye that did not close when heaven blinked. Was he chosen or did he choose? Was his loyalty born or forged? Light recoiled, timelines buckled, not just a fall but a folding. The cosmos inhaled. In the thunder that followed, they thought the voice was God's, but deeper listeners heard it differently. They heard a vow electrical, an ancient forging form in flame who is like God. And from that question a shape emerged, lightning given memory. So I ask you, what broke first, the rebel or the realm? What web was spun when silence dared to listen to itself? Because Michael was not the answer. He was the question made visible, and lightning was only the beginning. And still they watch from below. It began in stillness, not silence, but a perfect thunderous harmony, a resonance older than stars, older than the name stamped in holy writ. The eternal breathed, and what came forth was song, not speech, a choir of light cascading, infinite and indivisible. No war, no order, no Michael. But every light casts a shadow, something fractured. Not suddenly, but through a note so subtle in its dissonance that only the throne itself could have heard it. A feather, one among millions, turned ever so slightly against the current, a stirring in the breathless chorus. And from that shift a fall began, allegedly of one but truly of many, not shattered but softened. The fracture was not an explosion but a vanishing frequency, a thinning of radiance. As if one chord, barely perceptible, slipped just beneath the harmony, humming something older, something chosen. Before he bore a sword, before he bore the name Michael, was a current within that celestial harmony, not above, not separate. The traditions preserved in early Jewish apocalyptic texts like the Book of Enoch do not place him first, they place him present. As one among the holy ones, amid the watchers of heaven, not yet warrior, not yet the voice that cries who is like God. He was not yet the archangel. He was the balance unsplit. And then came choice, or something like it. Was it truly Lucifer who rebelled, or was it Michael who refused to turn? The church fathers wrote of the war in heaven as a divine necessity, but rarely do they name its first moment. In Revelation 12:7, the war appears sudden, erupting as if predetermined. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought the dragon. But nowhere do they speak of the moment the feather turned or who saw it shift. Origen, the early theologian, suggested that even angels had free will, and that Michael chose faithfulness not by force but by defiance. If so, faithfulness was itself rebellion. Against the pull, against the hush spreading through the ranks of light like ink in water, against the forgetting that soon hardened into law. So I ask you now, was Michael heaven's general, or its first dissident? Did he rise to command, or return to confront what no other dared see? And if the feather fell into shadow, who caught it before it reached the abyss? And still they watch from below. They told you Eden was lost once. But what if it was never lost, only sealed, not from humans but from heaven itself? Before dominions were named and thrones were set, before light fractured into day and night, there was a harmony, not a song but a resonance, primordial, indivisible. Creation hummed with an eternal note vibrating through what the mystics called the pleroma, fullness itself. In this nascent unity, no angel stood above another. No sword was drawn, no crown weighed divine thought, only being whole and unchallenged. Then came a breach, not a war not yet, but a tension, a thinning of that perfection. And it did not begin with Lucifer. No, it began with a question echoed without words like a ripple refusing to fade. According to the book of Enoch, Michael stood before the face of the Most High before even the rebellion. His name Hebrew Mame Hebrewi, Hebrew Yod, Hebrew Kaf, Hebrewa, Hebrew Aleph, Hebrewa, Hebrew Lamed, meaning who is like God. Birthed not as praise but as thunderous defiance against the unspoken pride swelling within heaven's own household. Yet we rarely speak of why Michael was named with a question. Names were once thresholds. They weren't given. They were revealed, summoned from the deep places by what the soul had already chosen. Michael's name was not merely a sound. It was a fracture in the silence, a harmonic disruption encoded with warning. Tradition elevated him to commander of heaven's armies, but scripture whispers of an earlier role, guardian, of what even the seraphim do not agree. The Syriac tradition, especially in the Apocalypse of Baruch, paints glimpses of a sacred geography, Eden not as a garden for man, but as a forgotten junction between divine realm and terrestrial echo, a place Michael knew, perhaps even protected, until heaven itself turned its face away. This Eden was not simply lost, it was exiled, hidden like a wound too holy to show. Some Kabbalists speak of it as the shattered vessel, the divine field that cracked under the weight of premature revelation. Not just a departure, but a deliberate veiling, not just a fall, but an unmaking of the memory itself. And Michael, he did not merely cast out the serpent, he followed it, past the veil, past fire, into the memory of earth. So ask yourself, if angels can fall from heaven, where do they land? And when a guardian is exiled from what he was made to protect, what remains of the gate that once bore his name? And still they watch from below. It begins not with fire, but with stillness. Before names, before thrones, before the great echo of fiat lux shattered into creation, there was a song, a perfect unsplintered harmony. The divine realms, realms beyond form or fall, vibrated with celestial accord. It was not sound as we know it, but vibration, resonance, a communion of intent. All was symphony. And then dissonance, not chaos, not yet, but a single frequency, unfamiliar and veiled, a resonance that did not belong, or rather refused to belong. From it spiraled something unspeakable, the first tension between loyalty and liberty. The heavens did not scream, it paused. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was choice, like a fault line forming beneath a dancing sea, unseen but irreversible. Many have called it the first lie, though no words were spoken. Others name it freedom. But the resonance was not loud, it was hollow, a sacred absence carved into the hymn, and the beings who listened, not with ears but with essence, knew. And into that quiet fracture Michael was not made, he stood, not above others but within them. No plume upon his shoulder, no radiant sigil marked his ascent. He was breath before form, resolve before word. The oldest texts, like the Hebrew book of Daniel, would one day name him chief prince, but in that primordial theater there were no titles, only presence, and a sword forged not of steel but of alignment. Some say this was the moment time found a rhythm, when eternity bent to witness. A ripple that split the infinite into memory, not through battle cries or lightning, but through the unbearable quiet of withheld allegiance. Even the stars pulled back into themselves as if unsure whether to shimmer. Yet the wound in heaven widened. A secret encoded itself in the folds of eternity, not spoken, not written, but acted. The Book of Enoch, buried in Ethiopian soil but preserved in the conscience of outcasts, would one day murmur his deeds among watchers and rebels. But even that was later downstream of trauma. The original rift was unrecorded. We trace it now only by shadows. The sword, the stance, the war that could not be seen, only felt. This was not a fight between good and evil. It was the refusal of corruption to name itself. And Michael, he did not strike out. He held the line when even the stars stepped back. So here is the haunting riddle whispered in sanctuaries and silicon alike. What if the sword of Michael was not God's wrath, but God's memory forged into a blade burning through mortal veins to remind us of what was nearly lost? And what if it still sings, still guards the gate between names, still hums in the blood of those who remember the silence before the song, and still they watch from below? It began before time had shape, not in chaos but in perfect resonance. Every frequency of creation sang in sync, a chorus forged not of sound but of divine will. There were no names yet, no thrones, no swords, only intention unfractured immense. And then, a break, not loud, not violent, just wrong. Subtle like a single discordant note that does not belong but cannot be unheard once it sounds. That was the first turning. Not a war, a whisper, a hesitation in heaven. The Zohar, the book of radiance from the Jewish mystical tradition, hints that before anything was made manifest there was what it calls the Ein Sof, the infinite, a presence without distinction. From within the undifferentiated light emerged 10 vessels, 10 sephirot, and one cracked. That crack would become the abyss into which disobedience poured. That crack is where the watchers would later fall through. But before they fell, they watched. They watched something happen to the harmony. Some say it was the birth of choice. Others, only a pause in the breath of the divine. And from that rupture, the one who would be known as Michael emerged. Not born, not made, but called into being by the very necessity of response. He was not the first, he was not the brightest, but he was the one who stood. A guardian formed not from fire or breath, but from verdict. He did not fight for power, he warred for balance. The apocalyptic book of Enoch preserves the memory. It speaks of 2 descents, one glorious of divine messengers sent to instruct, and the other fallen, led by Semiaza and Azazel, who traded wisdom for dominion. And who stood against them? He who is like God, Michael. That name etched into centuries of prayer and fear. But what drove the watchers to breach their station? What unspoken silence unfolded in the heavens to make angels envy earth? Perhaps it was not disobedience, but remembrance. Michael's rise cannot be told without their fall, and their fall was not rebellion alone. It was seduction, it was longing, it was mystery. Can purity be maintained once curiosity touches the heart of heaven? And if Michael knew the truth buried beneath their descent, did he war to condemn them, or to remember what even heaven chose to forget? The scrolls speak no further, but the silence insists, and still, they watch from below. In the hush before chronology, before saints walked and demons crawled, there was a sound. Not a voice, but a vibration, a pulse in the breath of being itself. Creation in its nascent hum held no sword, no throne, no name. Only the great harmony, a celestial choir unmixed by dissonance. But then something cleaved, not with violence but with choice. A split in the resonance, a note that could not return, not a fall but a fold, like a veil drawn across light. Like breath caught in the lungs of eternity. Before Michael was Michael, before the name thundered across parchment and prophecy, there was only will, motion without formation. And in that ancient ripple something chose to stand, not above but within. A presence that would become protector not by appointment but by essence. Yet even essence pays a price. What the Torah whispers and the Midrash veils, the book of Enoch dares to speak. The watchers who saw too much descended not just from heaven but from alignment, from the vibration that kept the tapestry taut. And when they fell, something had to rise, not to punish but to restore frequency. Michael not as victor but as tuning fork. The earliest whispers of this rupture survive not in canonized gospel but in the folds of older fires, parchments burned, dreams half remembered. In the Dead Sea Scrolls his name emerges veiled in smoke. M-I circumflex K-H-A macron ejective E macron L. The who is like God. Not a statement, a challenge. A question shouted through heaven's corridors as loyalties faltered. The Dead Sea fragments call him the great prince but never the great king. Why? Because Michael does not ascend by crown, he descends by purpose. And so the dissonance becomes law, light not serene but weaponized. The divine hierarchy crystallizes in trauma. Thrones are cast, not appointed. For in this first war, the one before history's ink, the crown doesn't gleam, it bleeds. Now hear this: they painted Michael in gold and victory, but they never showed you the stain, the ash on his wings, the silence after the clash, the sound that does not return. So I ask you, what kind of crown shines in glory, yet drips with the end of time? And still they watch from below. He was not always called Michael. Before the syllables of separation were born, before Archangel split heaven into order and office, there was only resonance and silence, a stillness more radiant than sound, more ancient than time. Creation pulsed in one unbroken chord, a breath before division. And then, a crack not in matter but in meaning, a fracture not of rebellion but of reflection. In that sacred symmetry, every being was mirror to the one. None led. None followed. It was the peacock's mirror, a symbol hidden in the Yazidi tradition where Melek Taus, the peacock angel, reflects the divine light without possessing it, just as Michael would come to do. That mirror shattered when hierarchy emerged, not as a necessity but as a rupture, a need to name what was once whole, to give rank to a flame. This is the first betrayal, subtle, unspoken. A name was given not to illuminate but to contain. Who is like God? His title declares, a question disguised as devotion yet echoing the trauma of a forced distinction. Michael, as he appears first in Daniel 10, is already bearing the weight of cosmic conflict, a prince among powers chosen not by aspiration but by assignment. The heavens scripted his role before the drama unfolded. But why? And who wrote? Long before that vision in Babylon, there were whispers in Zoroastrian thought, of Mithra, guardian of truth, weighing souls upon the bridge of judgment. Some scholars suggest this figure left footprints in the desert sands that would soon shape the archangel's sword-bearing image. This was not imitation, this was disguise. The divine cloaking itself across cultures, speaking in mirrored names. Even older myths, Sumerian chants, Tunusku, the fire god and divine messenger, carry a shape that echoes the coming shadow. Light wrapped in decree, fire split into assignment, an echo preparing its own voice. Secret societies would later draw circles around his sigil. Sephirotic diagrams from Kabbalists engraved his essence into the tree of life. He stood on the pillar of mercy but bore the heat of judgment, a paradox that cannot be resolved by doctrine, only encountered in awe. Michael is a name, but not a name. It is a veil stitched from echoes. So the question lingers, not who is like God, but what happens when the mirror breaks, and who dares to pick up the shards, who touches the edge and hears the scream still trapped inside the glass. And still, they watch from below. They said memory fades, but memory, true memory, does not die. It waits, in ash, in script, in silence, in the spaces between syllables where breath forgets it ever knew fire. There was a time before parchment, before priesthoods, before Michael was a name you could speak without shaking the walls. A time when stories were still blood and breath, not yet ink and dogma. In that time, Michael wasn't remembered. Michael was remembered through. He was thunder before alphabet, sword before metal, purpose before language. And the moment his name was etched into scripture, something was already being buried. The book of Daniel first dared name him, Michael your prince, protector of Israel, adversary to the powers of Persia. But even there the veil was already drawn, the roots far deeper, not just a celestial warrior but a cipher for something more ancient, something the text could barely contain. Jewish apocalyptic texts like the Book of Enoch whisper older truths. There Michael stands not merely against empires of earth, but against fallen watchers, against unsanctioned wisdom, against the rebellion of the heavenly host. He is cast as the guardian of the holy ones, the one who intercedes before the Most High in the days when angels bled sky, and heaven itself held its breath. In the revelation to John, he erupts in the heavens again, not meek, not metaphor, but war incarnate. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. This isn't poetry. This is a breach report from cosmic memory. The kind of memory that hums under ruins, that vibrates through ruined cathedrals and earthquake veins. Eastern Orthodox hymns do not name him casually. They call him Archstrategos, commander of the celestial armies. Not a metaphor, a mantle, not a servant, a sentinel, one who did not begin in visions but who ended them. Even in Islam, he walks across traditions, not erased but reframed. M.I. Macron, K.A. Macron, letter 2 B.E.I. Macron, L. the angel of mercy, balance, provision. 2 wings over fire and rain. A being who holds the cosmic equilibrium after the storm. Across centuries, tongues, and temples, his visual form changes, but his task never does. He doesn't teach. He doesn't plead. He guards. He executes. He remembers. Not memory like nostalgia, memory as law, as vibration, as flame. You see, scripture is only the bones, the flesh is memory, and memory bleeds through stone, through dreams, through names you forgot you heard as a child. And every time you speak his name aloud, you do not summon fiction. You invoke a history so vast, so suppressed you were never meant to carry it. All maps were redrawn to erase its shape. All bells recast to distort its tone. So why now do you remember? Where did you first feel the echo behind the name? When did the silence between the words begin to speak? And more dangerously, who gave you the right to recall what the world worked so hard to forget? And still, they watch from below.